If you're truly sick of people raving about podcast guesting being the best thing they did for their businesses, and you, on the other hand, don't even know where to even start, how to get invited onto the right shows, or how to pitch yourself without sounding like everybody else, in today's episode, Alex Sanfilippo, the founder of Podmatch.com, one of my favorite people in the podcasting space, and someone who has guested on hundreds of shows and received more awful pitches than you can imagine, goes beyond theory and gets super practical. Alex shares how to actually choose podcasts that are worth your time, what makes a great pitch, and why authenticity will always outperform generic AI generated outreach. I mean, this one's obvious, but I had to point it out because people are still doing them. So if you can, get comfortable, grab a pen and a piece of paper, and enjoy. This is Say Yes to Podcasting, where solopreneurs learn how to start podcasts that attract their ideal clients and do the marketing for them. I'm your host, Anja Lordanic. Say Yes to Podcasting today. We're going to get practical and talk about how to actually do the research, how to pitch, whom to pitch, and how to be a great podcast guest in general. And we're not going to hold anything back. We're going to give away as much as we can in the next 20-ish minutes. So, Alex, let's start with the show selection because this is more important than people actually realize, especially if they're new to podcast guesting. So, how do you personally decide nowadays which podcasts are worth appearing on today?
The first thing I want to see is what does their presence look like online? And I don't mean do they use every social media platform. As a matter of fact, some of my favorite shows I've ever been on, they don't even have social media. And I'm fine with that. But do they have a website? Where are they sending people that are in the show notes of episodes? Like I want to see what does their online presence look like? And what I'm looking for is anything that tells me that they're going to be around next week. Does that make sense? Like I want to know that they're not just going to disappear and this is the last episode and it might not even go live ever. And early on, I was on too many shows where I was their first guest or one of their first episodes, and my episode never aired. So it's interesting. I mentioned being on more than 700 shows as a guest. A portion of those never actually went live. Yes, I was a guest. Yes, they interviewed me, so I got the benefit out of it, but it never actually reached anybody else because they stopped before then. So what I'm looking for is what does their online footprint presence look like? Do they look like they've built something that they really care about and want to keep going? That's absolutely in my mind step one, especially when you're getting started. It's okay to go on a more broad range of shows, but that's in my mind a non-negotiable. So I want to see, are they actually going to stick with it? The next thing that goes hand in hand with this, I want to listen to the podcast. I hear too many times, I meet people that have quit podcast guesting, and I ask them well, what made you decide to stop? And they said, I didn't like any of the hosts I interviewed with. Like I didn't understand them, or I didn't like the way that they communicated. And to me, I hear that. I'm like, well, that could have been avoided. If you'd spend 5 minutes listening, you'd get to understand their personality. An example of this is before I did this, I went on a show and the host she interrupted everything I said. I could be mid-sentence, mid-story, and she'd be like, hold on. Let me ask you about this. And just all over the place. And I was like, man, did she not like me? Like, what was that? And I went and listened to some of her other episodes. She interrupted all of her guests the same way. If I would have spent 5 minutes listening, I would know I'm not going to have fun on this show. Like, I don't like to feel interrogated. Like, I wanted to actually have a conversation where I could get a full sentence out, right? But if I would have just listened, I would have known that. So for me, once again, I'm looking for their online footprint, which is my way of determining, are they going to stick with this long term? And two, would me and the host have any good synergy at all? Like, would we get along? Do I like the way they communicate? If yes on these two things, I'll proceed. If no, I'm going to stop right now.
Yeah, I have a twofold piece of advice, which I know you will agree with, and it is protect yourself as a podcast guest and as a podcast host. As a podcast guest, you share this perfect example. You need to protect your own energy as we keep sharing throughout our conversation. And the second thing is protect yourself as a podcast host, because if a podcast guest is not a great fit, or if the interview does not turn out the way you hoped, you don't need to publish it because you need to protect your listeners and you need to set a high bar at the very start as much as it's possible to have a great show from the very beginning. This is not to say that you need to be perfect. This is something I'm completely against. You can experiment, but your gut feeling is right most of the time. Would you agree?
Yeah, I've gone. I say yeah, and then shamefully drop my head. I've gone against my gut plenty of times, and every time I regret it. So
Same.
yes, go with your gut on it. Again, you don't need to be listening to hours upon hours of episodes to determine if it's going to be a right fit. Within 5 minutes, your gut can usually tell you yes or no, and follow that feeling. I think that I don't know if this was going to come up, so forgive me if I'm jumping ahead here. But I also think that as podcast guests, we need to avoid the idea of a like guesting sprint. And I know plenty of people who have done 100 episodes in 100 days. But then at day 100, they're like, never again. This was awful. But they're not leaving themselves enough space or time to be able to actually develop mastery. It's just quick reps. And so it's like going to the gym one time instead of going every day for a year and spending less time in it. And my suggestion, people are like, how have you done 700 episodes? Well, it's been over a decade. That's how I've done it. Slow and steady wins the race. And to me, podcast guesting is absolutely the long game. So as you said, Anya, like we're protecting our energy from day one, including how often we're being a guest. To me, 12 opportunities to be a guest in 1 year are better than 100 wrong opportunities to be a guest. Doesn't mean I'm looking for the biggest shows or the ones with the biggest reach or anything like that. I'm looking for the ones most well aligned with knowing who is listening to this is who I serve. That's where I want to show up and spend my time and energy.
I love that you brought this up because everyone wants to be a guest on Stephen Bartlett's show, Joe Rogan, Amy Porterfield, but those are not the shows that most of us would even benefit from, which sounds counterintuitive. But I will let you take the lead on this one and explain why niche podcasts matter more.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you on this notion of like just because those shows exist doesn't mean we should all be on them. And I hear from people all the time asking, well, how can you introduce me to one of the top 10 podcasters in the world? And my first thought is always, well, like first off, what have you done that warrants that? And if you got that platform, would you even be able to convert anything? Like, are you actually ready to be there? One of the podcasts that you mentioned, I've actually been invited on it, and I turned it down for now. It was a temporary turn down, but I said, "Hey, not yet. I know I'm not in a position where I'm ready for that." And they reached out and they said, "Hey, I can't tell you how much I respect the fact that you realize you're not actually ready for this opportunity." And I was like, "Let's circle
Mm.
back." We said we'd circle back within 2 years, and I'm actually getting at time of recording, I'm getting close to that 2 year mark where I'll circle back and say, "Hey, I'm either ready or I'm not." But I just know that when I got there, I would have squandered the opportunity. But for me, again, I think, like you said, the idea is the niche. I view podcast guesting or being a host as me on stage and all my listeners are sitting in seats. So physically, like envision that. And so if I told you, hey, I'd love for you to come on my podcast and share your expertise, share what you've learned, and my audience is here in the room, right? And you just got to be on stage with me and let's talk. There's about 50 people here. I don't know any expert that would say no to that opportunity. But because we're so preconditioned by social media, we're like, well, you need like millions of people following you for it to make sense. But the reality is, it's
Mm.
not the same. Social media has its place, but is not the same as a podcast. That is an intentional effort that somebody's making, saying, I want to better myself. I want to learn something. This is 45 minutes. People going to a podcast already know this is me 45 minutes, not 2 seconds scrolling past a Facebook ad or an Instagram ad, right? Again, that has its place, but is not the same thing. And so for me, again, I'm not even looking at audience size. I'm looking at how aligned is it, knowing that if there are even 20 or 30 people in that room, then that is worth my time. And so I always visualize me as a podcast guest or as a host as me on stage with people in seats in front of me. And if that's the right room for me to be in, how many people are in it doesn't necessarily matter that much because all I need is two or three of the right people for it to have a positive return on investment for me.
This is such an important message, and I want to underscore it further because we need to keep in mind that, with all due respect in the world, podcast listeners are sophisticated content consumers as opposed to we can also take ourselves as an example. I assume a different persona when I'm scrolling Instagram versus when I have my earpods in and I'm listening to a podcast show. So I was wondering, when it comes to podcast guesting, we also need to keep in mind the host because, as you said, they have their audience no matter how big or small they are. We need to respect them. We don't want to um, cross any boundaries. How can we appear as an expert who respects the host and their audience?
I asked a group of people this question: how do you show up to be ready for a podcast as a guest? Like, what has separated you to make you a top podcast guest? And I talked to a bunch of them, and I consistently heard it's the time they put in before ever getting to the recording studio, whether it be in person or virtual, that made all the difference. And so I doubled down. They're like, okay, all of you are saying the same thing. It's the time you put in beforehand. What does that mean, really? And what they're looking for, and this is something that I've adopted as well, is they're looking for the synergy between them and the host. And so, example, Anya, if you had a pet name for your listeners, something you always called your listeners, I would mirror that today because I've listened to your podcast. I know your name. I know the name of your podcast. I know that we both talk quick and we share a lot of details, a lot of stats, right? Like we communicate actually very similarly. And that made for me, I can tell all the synergies there. Your listeners are not going to hear me and be like, who is this weirdo? Right? Like I kind of
Mm.
flow with the way that you already make your podcast. And so great podcast guests, no, go listen to a host beforehand. Example, I've been on podcasts where the host is a lot slower in their communication style. They want to do like quick, I answer really fast, and then they want to come back and they want to make it very heavy conversation, much less information in it. And I show up knowing that. And I think that the best guests understand, okay, I'm listening not so I can just be prepared, but also so I can find there's the synergy that we're going to have because the host has built this know, like, and trust with their listeners. And I want to tap into that by showing up with that same energy. Could you imagine if I get on a podcast with someone who talks real quiet, real slow, real monotone, and I'm like, woo, what's up, everybody? So glad to be here. Automatically, I've now built this divide between me and the host listeners because I'm not showing up with the right energy. Now, I'm not saying don't be who you are, but this might be a tell of a podcast that maybe you just shouldn't be on, right? Like maybe it's okay, I can't
Yeah.
match that, I shouldn't be there. But you want to show up and honor and respect the platform the host has built, knowing that listeners are there because they like the host's energy, they like the host personality. The more you can prep to show up like that, building this immediate connection with the host, that will transcend to you and the listeners as well.
You just skipped ahead because I had this question and you answered it straight away. My question was, does that mean we need to be sort of chameleons and adapt to the show we're on? But you're actually saying find great shows that are a great fit in advance rather than you having to adjust in real time, right?
Correct, I'm all for adjusting in real time as well, to a certain extent. I'm not gonna change my personality or who I am, but I know that if I'm on a show where a host talks a little bit slower, I'm going to mindfully leave a note. It's one of the few notes I'll write. Alex talks slow, and I'll show up prepared for that. I can slow down a little bit without changing who I am at the core. So a little bit of flexibility, but more so looking for the connection before you ever get there.
Everything you're sharing is very human centered as it should be because podcasts are such a human to human medium, and it is so important to appear to show up as a human being because that's what we are. And I'm very passionate about this subject because when it comes to pitching, hardly anyone shows up as a human being. Everyone keeps on regurgitating the same AI pitch. So before I ask this question, which you know where I'm going with this, I want to share this fact about Podmatch. If you are on a platform such as Podmatch, which is essentially, if you're not familiar, a matchmaking service between podcast guests and hosts, you can appear both as a guest first and you can apply as a host as well. Later on, I have like a dual account, if you call it that way. And it is obvious why people are there. So it is much, let's say, warmer than if you were to send a cold email to a podcast host. Now, having said all of that, what makes a great pitch?
It's first off, pitching right now is just atrocious from an industry level. I mean,
Mm.
we see a little bit even on Podmatch. Like whenever it happens in the industry, is going to happen on platforms, all of them. And like we're trying to combat it a little bit, but DMs on social media, direct emails, it's just a mess. And this is actually not a bad thing for everybody hearing this today because it actually takes less effort than it ever has to get accepted as a guest on a podcast. Now, listen, it's simple, but it's not necessarily easy because what I'm telling you to do is going to require more effort than when the general population is doing. So I'll just share my whole framework here. I'll go really quick. So take notes, please. This will probably be the most administrative thing I share today. But so if you're hearing this, please take notes. But these are my steps. This is what I do every time I'm pitching to be a guest on podcast. First, I keep it short. If You get a pitch from anybody, it's typically really long, really drawn out. The best pitches are short. And if I'm a host, I am getting sometimes up to 30 and 40 different pitches per day via email, where I don't even accept guests. But I'll look through them all. And typically I'm like, too long to read right now. I'll do it later. Too long to read, too long to read. And then I'll see a shorter one and be like, you know what? I can read this right now. This will take me less than a minute. I can read this one now. Make your pitch that one. So step one is to keep it short. Step two is to not use AI. This is where I lose everybody right here. People are like, oh man, I don't really have time. AI can do it for me immediately. I promise you, everyone else is already using AI. And if you want to stand out, be the only person that doesn't. Podcast hosts like me, I mentioned getting 20 to 30 or whatever it is, 40 or 50 pitches per day, 100 a week, whatever it comes out to be. I'm not alone in that. That's almost every podcaster. I don't care how good you are at prompting or how an expert you are with AI. Hosts have seen it before, I promise. But what they haven't seen is you, the uniqueness that you bring. Even if AI has to help you a little bit, fine. But please, if you do it, write it up human, it has a typo in it, they're going to notice that and say a person did this one. So we keep it short. We don't use AI. Really, you can almost skip the rest of this. If you do those two things, you're already. If it's you versus 100 people, and you're going to be the one that gets picked by those two things. But the rest of it kind of gets into what you're actually going to say. The first thing I do is I lead with value. What I mean by lead with value is I don't mention that I've listened to the podcast, even though I always do before I pitch. But if you mention that you listen to an episode, AI can do that. And people assume, oh, AI is telling them that telling them the takeaway, because it can pull everything from an episode, the transcripts, and say, hey, I listened to your show and I like this. If you say that, people are going to assume you're AI. Leading with value simply means, hey, Anya, I've been enjoying your podcast. Say yes to podcasting. I left a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcast and attached it here. That's a way to lead with value. That's different. Most people don't do that. And then it's like, oh, wow, okay, this person actually heard it. They went and left me a rating and review. They attached it here. That's amazing, right? So lead with value. Next thing is to make a meaningful request. Make a meaningful request. So step four, is to make a meaningful request. All I mean by this is, one, ask. Make the ask. Too many people pitch, but they never actually say what they want. So say what you want, but make it meaningful by figuring out what you want to talk about and how that can uniquely help their audience. So instead of saying, hey, I'd love to come on your podcast, say, hey, I really, again, like say yes to podcasting. Have you talked about podcast guesting at all? That's my big topic. And it can really help people understand if they should be launching a show of their own. Would that be a good topic? Would you be interested? Like that's a meaningful request, because now a host like Anya can say, oh, yeah, actually, that's a good topic. That would be very helpful. Let's do that. So again, you want to make that meaningful request. Next point is to offer credibility. And this is where I find that we get long-winded. We start giving our credentials, our background, our resume, basically. But what I have found is the highest form of credibility is who I know that you know, what I like that you like. This requires a little bit of simple research. But if I go through your social media, I can find friends we have in common, or if we even like the same TV show or we have the same favorite band, that offers more credibility than anything else I've ever found. If I simply say, hey, I noticed that you're at this concert. I was actually there too. What a small world. I don't need anything else, right? Like now I am officially credible with that host because we have something in common. Now I always say link to, if you have a Podmatch account, link to your Podmatch profile, link to your LinkedIn profile, somewhere where a host can go to learn more, but you don't want to do that in your pitch. You can send them off somewhere else. The next thing here is, this is kind of like how I end it now, is I mentioned that I'll share the episode. And that's the truth. Don't lie. Most guests will not share an episode, but I will. I'll read anything you share on social media. If you tag me, if I see it somehow, I'm going to repost it. I'm going to share it myself. I'm going to make a blog post for it. So I just simply say, hey, if you have me on the show, I'd also love to share it with my audience to help grow the show a little bit. And then the other things I keep in mind is I just keep it really kind and casual. Like I want them to get to know me. So it's not overly formal, because I don't show up overly formal, as all of you can tell at this point, right? Like I'm not necessarily the most polished speaker, communicator, but I show up like me. And I want the host to get that from the second I pitch, because that is absolutely my first impression. I don't want them to think I'm somebody I'm not. And this is my pitch framework that has worked extremely well for me over the years. And I encourage you, take it, use it. It benefits you. It benefits the host really well.
Someone is going to say, but I don't have as many credentials as you, Alex. I haven't accomplished so many things. How can we stand out, even if we're a quote unquote newer expert at something, even if we don't have, say, 15 years of experience at doing the thing?
I think that if you can share a link, again, not typing all up here, but share a link to a time that you have a story that you think would resonate, that goes a long way. Good podcasters know that the story is what draws listeners in, not necessarily the expertise. Example, I one time had a speaker coach on my podcast. I mean, he is the top of the top for keynote speaking. He is so polished. The episode was so boring. I'm not trying to be rude. Like, he's an engaging communicator and speaker. But when we got into the tactics of it, I'm like, my goodness, dude, like, I would have rather found somebody that's like, hey, let me tell you about my terrifying one experience as a speaker and how that kind of propelled me into the business I have now. That's a story that people resonate with, right? Not, let me tell you how to be a
Mm.
speaker that can charge 300 grand for an hour speech. It's like, okay, this is boring, right? Like, but you who like flopped on your first time speaking, I want to hear that story. So it's a way to, you want to engage the story somehow, because some hosts, again, the good ones, they know that's what my listeners want, is that feels like they can connect the bridge themselves. They could see themselves making those same mistakes, right? Versus, how do I make $300,000 as a public speaker? Most of us hear that, even myself, a long time communicator at this point. If someone told me they could teach me how to do that, I'm going to immediately doubt it because I'm like, I'm not at that level. I know I'm not. Right. But if you said, hey,
Mm.
I actually became a full-time speaker, but let me tell you how I really messed that up. I'm like, okay, I could mess it up. Let's hear that. Right. Like, let's talk about that story
Yeah.
of coming around. So I think that you shouldn't sell yourself short. If you've got a story, you've got a message, a good host knows if that's going to be a right fit for their audience. Now, you're not going to hear yes from everybody, but somebody who can see that clearly, saying, I know my listeners are going to resonate with that, they're going to have you on. And that's okay. Own who you are, be real, raw, and relevant, and it's going to go really well for you.
This is so comforting because, and ironic because we need to train ourselves to be ourselves again, which is so sad. But it is possible. It is doable. People can be huge professionals and experts, like brilliant experts, and still be human beings who share their shortcomings all the time. And this is like such a great message because this is something I started sharing while I'm a podcast guest because English is not my first language, obviously, and it is something that has been a hindrance for a couple of years, and it has stopped me from launching my podcast. And nowadays, I talk about it as a matter of fact because it is a part of my story, but it's not a hindrance anymore. But someone on the other side, on the other end, while listening to me saying that, might say, okay, I can relate because English is not my first language either, or our stories are similar and we connect in this one thread, right? Have you noticed that too?
Yes, I've definitely noticed that. And I think that some of the things that we look at as our crutches are the things that hold us back, like maybe English not being your first language, but doing an English podcast. People that, at least in America, like, I prefer listening to your accent versus just like somebody who sounds like me. Like, and so it's like we view it ourselves as like a crutch when someone else is like, oh, that's the thing that actually attracted me to you. And so I think that
Mm.
we're our own worst critic. We're going to be harder on ourselves than anybody else, and the thing that we think might hold us back might actually be the thing that sets us apart.
Exactly. And I'm curious, I'm super curious about this pitching part because you shared your framework, which is really like to the point, very human, very relevant. But I was wondering about your thoughts on voice memo pitches or video pitches. Those are different, but require a bit more time for the host to go through and respond, right? So there are some pluses, some minuses.
Yeah, and yeah, I love that you brought this up. This is cool. Here's what I've actually learned is you shouldn't just default straight to email. I'm so glad you brought this up. You shouldn't default straight to email or to messaging. What you want to do is figure out, how does the host that I'm going to reach out to like to communicate? An example of this is, I have a friend and he played professional soccer at like in some of the biggest clubs around the world, like absolutely incredible. On his LinkedIn, he literally he has a big podcast and he says, I do not check my email. If you email me, I will not see it. And I had so many people when they found out we were connected, we were friends, they started being like, hey, I've sent this guy 10 emails. How can I be a guest on his podcast? I told them, I'm like, well, did you read his LinkedIn? I'm like, because I don't care if you have the world's perfect pitch. You're never going to get on his podcast by emailing, because he literally says, I do not check my email. It's not even reaching the person. And the lesson here is we should reach out to hosts how they like to be reached out to. We should communicate with them the way they like to be communicated with. If I'm looking at a host and they're always walking around doing selfie videos, talking about their podcast on Instagram stories, right? The best way for me to reach out is probably to send them a video of me walking around like them through Instagram DMs in a story form, because that's clearly how they like to communicate. Or if they're like, hey, email me here, then great, email them. If they're like, hey, send me a voice note on social media, Or if they're always doing that type of thing, look for what they're doing for how they're communicating, because that is the indicator as to this is the lane I should reach out in. This is where I should go. And a lot of high profile podcasts, like I usually don't tell people to go to high profile podcasts. People are like, how can I be a guest on this bigger show? Most of them have something that they're working on and saying, this is where I'm giving all my efforts. For a lot of them, it's an online community right now. Join that online community and reach out to them there. And I guarantee you, they're going to respond if that's where they're putting their efforts. So I'm so glad you brought this up, because I think it really matters for us as people wanting to be guests, is we communicate with the host at the level and where they like to be communicated with, if we want to have the best possible effort. And then you can kind of apply my template that I have there.
Agreed. And it is easy and difficult to stand out both at the same time, because we need to be smart, we need to be strategic, and at the end of the day we need to be human, as you mentioned multiple times. And I have this closing question which might be a bit cheeky, but let me ask. Some people, when they fall in love with podcast guesting, and when they feel this great chemistry between them and the guest, them and the host, sorry, how can we make sure that the host invites us back to their show?
To me, that's all about the communication that you keep pursuing after that interview. I'm thankful. I've been invited back to many shows, but it's not because I did such a good job that they remembered 6 months later. No, it's because I reached out to them again. So I'm a big proponent of using some sort of CRM, some sort of way to keep up with your contacts. So for me, every time I've been a guest on a podcast, I have added them to a CRM. And my goal is to follow up with 2 people per day. Now, over the years, some of them, they've gotten out of podcasting, or we just know there's no other synergy. So I've deleted them from the CRM. So I don't have nearly 1,000 people in the CRM, right? It's a few hundred. But every day I'm reaching out to the 2 that's been the longest since I've reached out. Just stay in communication. Someone's just like, hey, and yeah, I really love the episode we did together. I was thinking about it today. I re-listened to it, or I sent it to a friend. And that's all. It's not like, hey, I'd like to come back. It's just remembering each other, right? Because to me, a podcast interview is a meaningful experience. And a meaningful experience is the baseline, it's the foundation of all relationship. It's what you do after that meaningful experience that matters. So you can't just be like, cool, I did it, I'm done, I'll never talk to that person again. You're probably right. But if you say, you know what, they're busy, they're doing this every week, I'm going to reach out in 6 months and see how they're doing, and just thank them again for having me on the show. That's how you start getting these
Mm.
repeat opportunities. And we don't do it for the repeat opportunity. We do it because we built a real connection, a real friendship with somebody. We were able to serve listeners together. That goes such a long way. And so my encouragement is, if you're wanting to get repeat bookings and you're wanting to see where these relationships can go, be the one to keep up with them by communicating really well. Again, just using a simple CRM or something like that.
Yeah, this is such a great tip. And by the way, everyone needs content. So they're most likely going to say yes. They vetted you, they have a great relationship with you. And oh, yeah, I'm in a time crunch. I do need a new episode. So thank you for reaching back out, right?
Right.
Alex, since this is our second episode together, but it's not going to be the last, some people are tuning into this episode before listening to our previous one, which I highly recommend you go ahead and check out, which I will link to in the show notes. Just in case, can you briefly talk about your freebie, your 9 things we should keep in mind when it comes to podcast guesting?
Yeah, definitely. For everybody listening, if you go to podmatch.com/free, it's going to give you 9 quick ideas for being a podcast guest, whether you're experienced or new. I believe these 9 things would be really helpful. I don't ask for your email address or anything like that. They're just the best 9 things I've learned in 700 or so podcast episodes as a guest. So I hope they really inspire you. And again, that's podmatch.com/free. But Anya, you do such a beautiful job with this. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Alex. And I'm so happy to be a part of your community. We will chat again.